So this happened a while back. I was probably around 10 or 11 years old, meaning my brother Alex was around 8 or 9 years old. We were walking home from the bus, which takes about 7 minutes to do, when I noticed something was off. I didn't see anything at first, but I just knew something was wrong. My brother and I start walking home. As only two kids who got off at our stop were him and I. This blue silver beat up truck drives past us, and I think nothing of it. It never slowed down or stopped, it just kept going. Alex and I were holding hands, as my grandma always told me to do, as he's my baby brother, and I want nothing to happen to him. Nothing happens at first, but then the same truck drives around again, driving our way this time. There was a cul-de-sac at the end of our road. It was driving slower this time, and went up the road and turned, out of sight. Now, Alex and I were nearing a three-way intersection that connected the cul-de-sac to the other side road, right off the main road the man just drove down. I happened to look down the street and see the truck driving real slow down the street towards us again. I knew we had to run. I knew there was no other option. I knew that if we didn't, my brother and I would not be safe. I don't know how I knew, but I did. As soon as we passed a house that blocked us from the view, I turned to Alex and spoke to him, exactly 4 words. No questions, just run. And we did. In our driveway, which was about 100 feet long by the way, there's a few rose bushes and pine trees that divide our home and the next door neighbors. I'm dragging him there and told him to be quiet and that I'll explain later. I watched as the same truck drove down and around the cul-de-sac again before coming to a stop right in front of our house. I had to hold my brother's mouth shut because he was crying and I was scared that whoever was following us would hear him and hurt us. I was more worried for him than myself at this point. I was in fight or flight mode. I was the big sister. I had to protect him. I looked at him and said that the truck was following us and told him not to be scared, that I wouldn't let anyone hurt him, and he seemed to calm down a little. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, the door to the truck opened and out came the man. He was tall, skinny, and messy. Short hair covered the torn baseball cap, ripped jean shorts, and a puke green tank top. He entered our yard and looked around a bit. Alex and I were still in the bushes, and I was trying to find a way to get to our house safely without getting this dude's attention. The guy left after what felt like forever and entered his truck. He started it and drove away slowly. I waited a few minutes to make sure that he was gone before turning to my brother and saying, "We need to run. When I count to 3, we are going to run behind the house to the back door, okay?" He agreed, and we waited a few more seconds before I started counting. I still didn't have a good feeling about this, but I knew we had to move. I started counting. As soon as I hit 3, we booked it across our driveway into our front yard to go around the house. As soon as we left our spot, I heard it. The sound of accelerating. He saw us. He was waiting for us to leave. He chased us up our driveway as we ran around the side. I grabbed Alex's hand and practically dragged him around the house and made him run ahead to the garage door to see if it was locked while I searched for my house keys. The garage door was open, which was about 20 feet away from me. I swear to God I saw this man round the opposite corner of the house that we did. We entered and I slammed the door shut, locking it and deadbolting it. I didn't stop running until I opened the house door and ran downstairs with Alex, screaming our safe word. My grandmother made a safe word for us that was a normal everyday word that we could use if we were in danger. Just had to scream it basically. It woke up my aunt who worked the night shift and was sleeping. We told her everything and she stayed up with us until my grandmother got home. We called the police and that was my first interaction with an officer. The man was never caught. To this day I don't know what he wanted, but I'm sure it wasn't good. I'm just glad that my grandmother drilled stranger danger into my head. I don't know where my brother and I would be right now if she hadn't. So to the messy man in the blue and silver truck, let's not meet again. I've been holding on to this story for years now and would like to finally get it off my chest. So my siblings and I lived close to the elementary school, where we would often walk our dog in the playing field and the crop of woods, or we would let our dog roam around while we played at the playground or made pretend in the woods. I think I was around 14 when this happened, about 10 years ago. This schoolyard had a playing field, a playground near the building, and a playground farther away from the building in the crop of trees. We were swinging on the swing set in the more distant playground, but from this area you could clearly see the residential streets and parking lot of the school, which kind of wrapped around the crop of forest. As we are swinging, I see an SUV drive up one of the roads and pull into the parking lot. It's a weekend, so there's no cars around and not very many people. Maybe the odd passerby also walking their dog through the school grounds. The SUV is about 130 feet away from where I am, and I wear glasses, so I can't see very well what the people look like as they exit the car, but I can see some distinct clothing pieces. There are 3 people. 2 looked older and are dressed as if they're older middle-aged, like in their 50s. I remember one of these people wearing a wide-brimmed woman's sun hat. The third person looked like an older teen or young adult in his 20s and was wearing a green and white striped jersey and cleats. It's not uncommon to see people walk or drive to the school to use the field and play sports, though looking back now, I realize it was odd that they parked on the lot, not on the side of the road near to the field, which is on the opposite side of the property. In any case, I think, okay, just some grandparents and their grandson going to practice on the field and go about playing with my sibling. I remember watching the Theo walk away around the school building, completely opposite to where we were on the property. We have our dog with us, and after time, we decide to stop swinging and take the dog on a walk through the trails in the forest brush. Maybe 15 to 20 minutes had passed since we saw the car pull up. The brush we are walking in is basically in a very corner of the school property. There's a metal chain link fence in front of us, and beyond it is sidewalks and residential roads. To our right is another fence that separates people's backyards from the school ground. These homes all have tall trees growing along the fence for added privacy, so it's almost impossible to see into the school. My sibling and I were just on that age where playing pretend didn't really feel genuine and spur of the moment, like we were about to grow out of it. I'm feeling bored but don't want to go home yet. So I pick a branch of these red berries that grow on the schoolyard and say to my sibling, "Hey, want to play a game?" Which is code for, let's play pretend. I bend down and offer a berry to my dog as a starting point to the game. They've never hurt her. I'm speaking to my sibling who's walking in front of me as I bend down, but my voice trails off as I see my dog's behavior. She's completely ignoring the berries and me, and is instead moving past me slowly, ears back and nose pointed, as if she was approaching something. I follow her movements, still looking down. When I finally look up, there are the 3 people from the SUV not 6 feet away from me. They are certainly not a couple of grandparents and a kid, but 3 grown men. I remember the faces of the 2 older men pretending to be grandparents. The foremost man had short white hair and white scruff facial hair. His mouth was open in a faint O, as if he breathed quietly and focused on keeping his footsteps light. The other man was extremely thin, his cheekbones popping out, and shoulder-length, greasy brown hair hung around his skeletal features. They had crept up behind my sibling and I silently, and remained just as quiet as they all turned their backs, quickly, pretending to point off to the trees like they were watching birds or something. It was bizarre how silent this whole encounter was. I immediately realized that we need to get the fuck out of there, and turn my attention back to my sibling as I grab my dog's collar and get her hooked up to the leash. My sibling is about a foot from me, but seems oblivious still to the 3 creeps in the woods right behind us. I tell him over and over again that we need to leave, but they had become wrapped up in the imaginary game I proposed moments ago. Finally, my sibling sees the men. I never looked back at the creeps, only to my sibling. My sibling also stops talking and starts walking with me. Thankfully, an opening in the fence between these now haunted woods and the road is only a few feet ahead, and we get some distance and obstacles between us and the creeps. To my frustration, my sibling wants to stop on the sidewalk and pick some berries through the fence. I frantically tell him to come on, let's go. I still never look back towards the men, my vision tunneling on the safety of the open roads and sidewalks and homes in front of us. We get home without incident, at least to my knowledge. Had the men followed us on foot, gone back to the car and followed, or simply gave up? I didn't care. I just wanted to get home, which was only a couple blocks away. When we got home, I broke down. I told my mom what happened, and I remember her reaction being kind of nonchalant. I had always been an anxious child, and she developed a habit of downplaying things in kind of a exposure therapy way. I realized I still didn't feel safe with this reaction and retreated to the basement to cry alone. In recounting the story to my mom years later, she said she did call the police, but nothing came of it. I'm also very thankful for my dog, as it likely saved the lives of myself and my sibling that day. In the years since, I became highly skilled in reading people's body language. I could tell when someone's lying. I can read people's emotions and intentions like a book. I can tell if someone's vibe is off from a good distance away. This has become a blessing and a curse. So 3 fucking creeps from the woods. I hope no one else was subjected to your presence, and I hope you rot in hell for what you did. Let's not meet again. I think I was about 10 years old when me and my buddies decided to go out and have a good time. Back in those days, kids all around would make these poor man airsoft weapons out of plastic tubes and rubber gloves and use dry peas as ammo. So anyways, we went out and had a blast shooting at each other. And at some point, me and my teammate realized that a few of our buddies had been gone for quite a long time, but we had a general idea where they went. So we started to head towards them. As soon as we arrived in the general area where we thought they would be, our buddies run fast as fuck yelling, "Run, you guys! There's this crazy old guy coming with a van." So I was a little confused at this time and watched as my buddies ran off, nowhere to be seen at this point. I see that van coming up and I panic and start running like hell. This guy catches up pretty quickly, almost running me over with his van and yelling that if I move an inch, he would end me. He gets a hold of me and starts dragging me back to his van as I scream for help. When I'm almost inside the guy's van, this guy, maybe in his 20s, with a heavy metal outfit, yells to this bastard, "Leave those kids alone or I'll kill you where you stand." This guy turns around and at the same time this 20-year-old drops him with a single punch and keeps beating him while telling me to run to my parents. My dad tried to find the guy who literally saved my life and thank him and reward him, but only found a puddle of blood where this happened. I'm a 26-year-old female and was sitting down with my fiance talking about creepy things that happened to us as kids, and I remembered this. I was about 8 or 9 and my neighborhood would do this Christmas house celebration where everyone's house would do something different. I grew up in a very quiet, secure, everyone knows everybody part of Florida. It was all my neighborhood kids and myself playing outside while our parents drank and did festive holiday stuff. As we were playing, this car pulled up and asked if one of us could show him the pool. For reference, my house was in the back of the neighborhood, and to get to it, you had to pass a clearly visible pool. This was an older couple, around 50 I would say, so my brain didn't register the threat. I was a very kind and naive kid, so I offered to go with them to show them the pool. Right before I could get in the car, I finally remembered to tell my parents, so me and other kids run inside to get my mother. Upon hearing what was going on, her and the rest of the adults ran outside, and the car and the couple were gone. It's crazy to think about now that I was most likely almost kidnapped on Christmas. Who knows what would have happened to me? So couple in the car, if you're still alive, let's not meet again. A few weeks ago, I was walking my dog later at night before bed. He's an English black lab, so he's pretty big, and can look intimidating. He's very friendly though. I was only 1 block away from my house when this black car pulls up next to me. It starts to match my walking pace and stayed next to me. My dog was on the right side of me, and he blended in with the darkness, so you couldn't see him from the street as well, as he was being hidden by the parked cars. I started to panic a little, as the car just slowed and stayed next to me. When I got to the end of the block, my dog walks in front of me and stares towards the car, letting me know he wants to cross the street. At that point, the car just speeds off. I immediately went home and haven't walked him at night since.
Thought I'd share an old story. Still not totally sure how to discern this one though. For context, I was like 17, female, when this happened, and it was in a residential neighborhood where it's not all that common to find homeless people. So one day, I was in some bushes at my usual smoke spot near a public space but hidden, and a man walks up and finds me on accident. He looks half uncapped, half clean, ripped but washed jeans, long hair but combed and clean shaven, big backpack but has a wallet and phone. Still, I assume he's a homeless guy. I try to be polite but also careful, because I am a young girl at this time, and that's the nature of life. But he's also in a position where I can't get out of my spot without walking directly past him, and he's kind of blocking my exit with his body. Anyhow, he starts making conversation, just generally talking about if I like the town we live in, stuff like that. At one point, he starts going into all these crazy stories about how he's a love child of like James Dean and some golden age actress or something that I literally can't remember. And he's talking about all this time spent with Cher, and I'm just sitting there nodding politely, pretending to believe it, hoping he'll just go away. Then he starts getting into how he's a founder of the ARC, a chain thrift store. Again, I know this is bullshit, because I knew the history of the ARC from personal family ties to it. He showed me all this proof. It's like old ARC, business cards, and stuff that anyone could grab from the counter. Then he starts trying to tell me he owns most of the apartment buildings in town, and he'll rent me an apartment building for cheap. Again, the proof he's showing me is random notes in his wallet that he's illegibly scribbled on. At this point, he's been spouting lies for the better part of an hour, and I know he's just not gonna walk away if I let him keep going. But still, I assume he's just a lonely homeless guy making up lies for fun. So I make up my own lie and say I have to get to work and slide past him, hoping that'll be that. But then he starts following me back to my car and insists I take his business card. It's some random guy's card with his name and phone number written on the back. God knows if they were real info. I take it, then keep walking. He keeps following, and this is when he starts asking more personal questions, and red flags start raising. He begins asking if I live alone, if I still live with my family, if I live just with my mom, or my dad too. Am I close with my family? Am I happy at home? Do I have any brothers? How many brothers? Older or younger? Specifically brothers. Never ask if I have sisters. A lot of this stuff just makes me think he's gauging not only what level of protection I have, but also who would be looking for me if I was gone, and whether or not if I was looking to run away or looking for someone to put my trust into. Just very trafficky, kidnappy stuff. To end this all, I told him I live with my dad and my 3 brothers, all of whom who love me very much and were very protective and love to work out. He says okay, but if I ever need to escape home for a little or need a place to live, I had his business card, and I should call him, and he'd house me for free. I kept walking, he kept following, and I was not about to go back to my car, let him know what I drove, and my license plate. So I just sort of stopped in the middle of the sidewalk, and at a crossroad, and stepped aside, and pretended to fiddle with my phone, and he walked in the other direction, and I booked it to my car and left. I was wigged out, but also, it still could have been an innocent interaction, and I do stand by that, but the way it ended up just freaked me out. So I filed a harassment police report, which they did not want to take, but I forced them to, just in case something happened to me or someone else. A week or two later, I'm at a shop in a different neighborhood, though one close by. I'm in the checkout line, and I glance behind me, and there's the guy. I look down. He's not holding anything to buy, so I try and stay calm, hand my stuff to the cashier, and ask her to hold it for me, and then I quickly walk out to my car, making sure he hasn't followed me again, and go home. I don't think he followed me to the store anyway. At most, he saw me walking in from the parking lot and came in after me, but I think more likely he was already in there and just spotted me and walked up behind me, or it's none of the above. That's the thing is, I really cannot tell if this was just me overreacting to a slightly odd, possibly homeless man, or if it could have been something more sinister had my responses and behaviors been different. So when I was a kid, maybe 6 or 7, this was the mid-1990s, we took a family trip to the beach in Florida. We were staying in a beach house, a short walking distance from the beach. We went to the beach, and I was supposed to stay inside with my mom, but I wandered way down, and before I knew it, I was lost. A lot of the houses looked the same, and I wasn't sure which one was ours. Plus, I couldn't see my mom anywhere. It started to rain. Came to a path that I was pretty sure led back to our house. Only it didn't lead to any house at all, but instead to a parking lot. There was a big dirty van parked there. It was the only vehicle around. I was about to turn back when I noticed an overweight woman with brown hair, a hot pink tank top, and those big, chunky, thick glasses that were popular in the 80s, waving and smiling at me. From the passenger seat of the van, she said something like, "Oh my, it's raining. Where's your mommy? Let's take you to her. It's dangerous to be out here in the rain. You could get struck by lightning." She was very friendly, almost overly so. In the driver's seat was a very overweight man without a shirt on, a hairy gray chest, and some chunky looking gold chain. He was wearing yellow, tinted Elvis shades, and staring at me intently. He was also smoking a cigarette, which I knew was bad. The woman stepped out of the van and kneeled down to me. She asked how old I was. When I told her, she gleefully remarked, "Oh my, we have 2 boys your age at our house. You should come over and spend the night. We've got movies, Nintendo, and in the morning, we've got all types of cereal." I had been taught all about stranger danger, but at this point in my life, no adult had ever given me any reason not to trust them. The lady continued talking about stuff, like how the boys have go-karts, and they like to drink chocolate milk. She made it seem very entertaining for a 7-year-old kid, and at this point, I trusted her. I mostly liked the idea of getting to play with some kids my age. Then I remembered that I needed to ask my mom first. I told her this. She told me that was no problem, that they lived just up the road. My mom shouldn't mind. It started raining harder, and she opened the sliding door of the van and said something like, "Now, let's get you out of this rain and go find your mommy." I knew logically that I shouldn't do this, but this lady seemed really nice, and I was desperately wanting to get out of the rain. As I walked to the open door of the van, I noticed an awful stench that almost made me gag. This set off alarm bells in my head that something wasn't right. There were cigarette butts all over the floor. I looked up at the fat man, who was not only staring at me with this menacing glare, but he had this really creepy toothy smile, and his teeth were stained a dark yellow. I could pick up a very fucked up vibe from him. I knew now that I should run, but the woman was ushering me to hurry up. Her demeanor had changed. She was being demanding and trying to literally push me into the van. She sounded angry and said, "Get in already," in a tone that was the complete opposite of how she had sounded before. I jumped aside and started running as fast as I could. The woman managed to grab my arm or wrist, but somehow I was able to quickly break free and run back to the beach. I think she tried to chase me, but like I said, she was very overweight. I made it back to my mom, who was freaking out. I tried explaining what had happened to me, but I don't think that at 7 years old, I was able to convey the gravity of what had happened to me, and I didn't fully understand it myself. This happened about 10 years ago, in an area between Seattle and Tacoma, Washington. My friend, we'll call him R, and I used to regularly go to Tacoma to sing karaoke at a bar there. To be honest, I don't think I've ever seen the city of Tacoma during the day. Anyways, so it's about 1 or 2 in the morning, and we're heading back to Seattle, and we have to stop for gas. He pulls over at this station, and I'm buzzed and feeling good. So this creepy station doesn't even register with me. As I'm sitting, messing with the radio, suddenly my door swings open. I only saw a flash of him, because it was all blindingly quick. But he was kinda middle height, dark skinned, like too much tanning, had a blank stare, tattered clothes. I remember he had a black jacket on too, like leather or something, but it was torn and holey. So here I am, trying to pull the door closed, and I'm realizing this man is very strong. He honestly won the tug of war with me trying to slam the door closed. If my adrenaline hadn't kicked in, I don't know. I do finally manage to get it closed after maybe what was only a few seconds, and immediately started looking around for my friend, panicked and confused. R has already been yelling at the guy to get the F away from my car. Surprisingly, the man listens. R isn't the most intimidating looking guy or anything, but maybe the guy didn't want to cause a scene. I don't recall there being anyone else. Outside the station with us that night, but R was being very loud and forceful. So I'm watching the man walk away, and he's not looking back at us or making a sound that I can hear, which is what made the entire thing more unusual. R gets back in the car, and he's usually calm, but like a deadpan, like when you see something terrible, but you're too scared to move. I look to see where he's looking, and he's looking at the creepy guy who is now facing us with that same emotionless stare, just watching us leave the pump and back towards the streets. My eyes are on him the entire time too. We book it out of there, and that was the end of that. To this day, I don't stop at gas stations at night at all, if I can help it, unless another car is there or it's on a busy street. To the guy who tried to get into my friend's car that night, I hope you turned your life of crime around, but still, let's not meet again.
I'm a 23-year-old female. At the time this happened, I was 19 and homeless in a big city. I recently moved to that city and was on my way back to the shelter from the public library, my favorite place to hang out during the day. I was taking a shortcut through an alley wide enough for a car to go through. I noticed an old beat-up car come into the alley and drive slowly behind me. I figured that they probably didn't feel like they had enough room to pass me, so I picked up the pace and crossed the street. They drove on the same side of the street that I was on and kept pace with me. There was just one guy in the vehicle, looked to be in his mid-20s and Hispanic. He rolled down his window and said, "Hey, are you okay? How old are you?" I looked like I was just about 14, and I'm pretty short, so I got that question a lot. I just responded, "I'm fine. I'm not a minor if that's what you're asking." He asked me if I needed a ride, and I politely declined. Then he starts telling me that he's just concerned and wanted to talk. He really insisted and smiled through almost the entire interaction. It was very off-putting how much he was smiling. I asked him why we couldn't just talk on the street where we were, and he dodges the question and asked me again if I'm sure that I don't want to ride. My gut was telling me that he had bad intentions, and if I were as young as I looked, I might have fallen for it. Instead, I looked around me to make sure I wasn't going to get ambushed and walked up to his passenger window. I told him in the most threatening voice I could muster, "I know you don't really want to talk. I'm sure you have worse things in mind." I paused and took another look around. "And I've memorized your license plate. I'm going to go straight to the police station. I better not see you again." I never saw him again. Unfortunately, though, I forgot to write down his plate number. I actually did memorize them, and the shelter curfew was going in effect soon, so I didn't have time to file a report at the station. It didn't occur to me to call the non-emergency number. I also purchased as large of a knife as I could legally carry for self-defense. This happened about 20 years ago. I was 9 at the time, but my parents have also told me their side of the story on a bunch of different occasions, so that should help. My parents are both biologists. They met at work, and from there, it's history. The place where they worked at the time was a government building dedicated to biology research using government projects towards the public, meaning they were the ones studying the environment and making the environment protection laws around their studies. This being a massive old government building, it also had a security guard present day and night. During the day, the security guard would mostly just stay in reception and greet people. But at night, they would do their rounds and make sure that there was no intruders because of all the science equipment and computers kept in the building. One of these guards is the let's not meet guy. Initially, he seemed like the nicest person. He was always nice to me, and frankly, all the memories I have of him before this were very nice. He'd greet me and talk to me in the nicest way every time my parents brought me to work. He would make me paper planes, which he was surprisingly good at, and throw them all around with me. And he would stay with me at reception in the days my parents had to work into the night. Obviously for me that got really boring, really fast. So he would keep me company and entertain me. Mostly he would just talk, play with paper planes, and watch TV. It all seemed nice enough for my parents to trust him with me, which was probably their biggest mistake. One night, my parents had to work even later than usual. I think it was around 10 p.m., and they were still at it. So this guy, who was on the night shift, decided to take me around the building with him to do rounds. We started on the top floor, checking all the rooms and exterior part of the roof. Every room was so dark that I'd always stay a little bit behind and wait for him to turn the lights on. Then he stepped down to the second floor where my parents' labs were. We checked the opposite side of the building, going into the labs with the massive extractors, microscopes, and every kind of science equipment you may think of. We walked down the stairs to the first floor, where most of the administration rooms were. I still remember seeing maps on the walls with embalmed fish everywhere serving as decorations. First floor was all clear, so it was time to check the 2 basement levels. I thought it would have made sense to check the labs on the right side first, as the left side had a flight of stairs at the end leading up to where my parents were. But for some reason he decided that we would check that side first. We checked all the labs, but I noticed his pace was accelerating, and he was starting to look and sound happier, excited even. Once again, we checked all the labs, all the corners from one end to the other, turning the lights on ahead of us and turning them off behind us when we left. When we got to the last lab area, he turned all the lights on and went inside. There were 3 separate offices on each side of the lab, and on the first one, he hurried towards the printer, opened it up, took out 2 pieces of paper, and made 2 quick paper planes. That's when everything changed. He picked up one of the planes, went outside the office, and threw it towards the end of the room. Then he told me the one he just threw was mine, and that we could throw them all around there. I ran to the other side of the room to pick up the plane, excited to play with it, and suddenly the lights went off. When I turned to check what was happening, I saw him getting out of the lab, turning the lights off, and locking the door. I ran to the door, punched and kicked at it while screaming for him to open it, panic taking over me because of how scared I was of being in the dark at the time. Through the glass door, I could see him scurrying away in the corridors, turning the lights off as he went, disappearing and turning the corner. I'm pretty sure everything I felt and every shadow and every creepy monster I saw in there while waiting was a part of my imagination because of how scared I was. I balled up against the corner and I could see a shadow moving around in the dark. I could only cry, lost, without knowing what was happening and why he was doing that. My parents finished up their work eventually, and when they did, they packed up their things and made their way to the lobby to pick me up and go home. When they got there, the security guard was at reception and I was nowhere to be found. They panicked, of course. Must have shouted 100 different cuss words at the guy, and I'm not sure how my dad didn't murder him right there and then. But when they first asked the guy where the hell I was and what he had done with me, he simply said that he had done his rounds with me and I must have gotten lost somewhere. This building would take you about an hour and a half check from top to bottom, even if you're rushing. So, must have gotten lost somewhere is not exactly helpful. They looked for hours without finding me. It was only when I saw the light at the far end of the corridors leading to the lab I was in that I got the courage to stand up, rush towards the door and start punching it as hard as I could. They finally found me in there and made the guard unlock the door to get me out. I don't really remember sleeping that night, and if I did, it must have been out of exhaustion. But I know I made my mom stay in my bedroom with me the entire night. Of course, my parents made a complaint against the guard, and when they did, the guy started being investigated. He was later fired and arrested, not for locking me away where he probably hoped no one would find me, but because he was partnering up with other criminals to steal computers and equipment from the building to sell on some shady market with all the information in the hard drives and make money off of it. By then, he had stole a lot of the old computers without anyone realizing, and who knows what his plans were for me that night. I'm not convinced that locking a crying child in the middle of the darkness, hidden away in a room, is exactly the most normal behavior if you're not trying to hide them and come get them later when everyone else has left and sell them as part of your product. Luckily, he never had a chance to do that, and I really hope he never got to do that to any other kid. I was around the age of 7 years old, and I was playing in my cousin's backyard when a man started to talk to me from the other side of the fence. He told me that he was one of my cousins, which I immediately knew wasn't true. He told me that I should come with him, and he wants to have a lot of fun with me, and he loves me. I ran back inside my cousin's house and told my mom and my aunt what just happened, and they both looked out the window and could see that this guy had already gone. I then described what the man looked like to them, and they told me that they never had a cousin that looked like him. I think they thought I made it up because now when I ask them about it, they say, "Oh wait, that actually happened? I thought you just wanted attention." It's so creepy thinking about a grown man who I didn't even know telling a 7-year-old me that he loves me. Yuck, I can only imagine what he meant. Here's a bit of context for the post. I grew up about 15 miles outside of downtown Portland in a semi-rural area. We lived on a windy country road in the hills where the homes were spread quite a distance apart. Our closest neighbor was maybe about a 10-minute walk away. Our house was set off in the back of the road and had a gravel driveway that took a sharp turn so you couldn't see the house from the road, and vice versa. One warm spring day when I was 10, I was riding the bus home from school. As the bus squeaked to a stop at my driveway, I looked out the window to my left and saw a man in a gray pickup idling alongside the road, parked perpendicular to my driveway, almost blocking it. Being so young, I thought nothing of it, but when I got to the front of the bus, the driver held out his arm blocking me from going any further. "Do you recognize that truck or that man?" I told her no. At this point, she opened the door, sliding the window, and motioned for him moving along. He looked at her, then looked away, and didn't move. He wasn't looking at a map or anything, only sitting there. The bus driver then got on an intercom and told him that he needs to move along, but he continued to stay there. Then she said, "Sir, you best move along. I'm not going anywhere until you get out of here." He finally left, and after a few minutes, the bus driver let me out, and she said that she'll wait several minutes for me to get up my driveway to my home. I told my mom what happened as soon as I got home, and the next morning she came with me to catch the bus and to thank the driver. I believe she gave her some sort of gift, but I'm not sure exactly. After that incident, my mom and stepdad hauled out a section of trees at the end of the driveway as a hiding spot. In that spot, my siblings and I would watch the road while waiting for the bus in the mornings while nobody could see us. Anyway, this incident gives me chills when I think back. If my bus driver hadn't been so vigilant in looking out for me, and if this man in the pickup had been up to no good, I would be a goner. Right after my driveway, there's a sharp turn and a steep hill, and the bus would have been out of sight within seconds. There would have been no witnesses.